Hi everyone, we're back for our final leg of the Death Rocket. At this point, we finished both of the crew, although I think I do want to change some of the colors on the rocket over here. I want to make it a little bit more red because I think that would look better on the carriage itself. But yeah, it's time to finally paint this, the carriage. And this has been something that I've been waiting for a long time to do because I don't know that there is a lot of out of all the parts of painting this model. I think this is the bit that's a little bit more like a marathon, less of a sprint, because there's just all these little bits of angles and things that I need to sort of get in and cover, and it's more of an endurance thing. So it might get a little bit rambly in this one. I think that's par for the course for my videos. I think if you've watched my previous videos, you kind of know what my kind of video style is like. And yeah, I think you know what you're in for. Kind of an ominous start to the video. All right, cool. So as I've mentioned before, I like to actually pre-assemble a lot of my models because I think, with very few exceptions, first of all, the bits that you can't really see easily, I think we could all stand to spend a little bit less time worrying about. So long as everything is nice and clear and nicely presented on the tabletop, I think that kind of works. So I would spend a little bit less time worrying about the bits that are a little bit hard to see, a little bit obscured behind like walls of detail and so on. So not to worry about that. Also, I think it helps me get a handle on how far along a project is. Sometimes if you're working with like a half a dozen sub-assemblies, you might end up with a miniature that kind of looks like it's not finished at all, but it's really because it's lying in half a dozen pieces that the model kind of looks like it's not ready to go, and it can kind of hide some of the progress that you've made. And of course, vice versa. Sometimes they look a lot more done than they happen to be, just because you happen to have one really impressive component that's more or less ready to go, but there's a lot of hidden progress that isn't very visible. So with that in mind, I like to actually use as few sub-assemblies as I can humanly get away with, just because that gives me a better grip on how much of the model I have left to do, and that makes me feel better as I'm working through it. So this model has a few quirks of design that are a little bit hard to get to grips with. First of all, there is a lot of metal, as you would expect on any like Chaos Dwarf War machine, of course. But also, there are very large sections of just what I would call very featureless metal bits. So actually, like starting to paint this, it can get a little bit fiddly. But I think the idea that we want to get through to today is that just sometimes it's just about just soldiering on and getting as much of the details done as possible. Just being patient and just working through bits section by section, and eventually we will get there. So I'm not too worried. I think we can still get this done. If not, then I might just fast forward a little bit just to see. But I think we can get pretty good progress on this. I hope you stay with me and listen to me ramble on as I go on. Or if nothing else, get out models of your own and sort of work on them with this video in the background, and I think we'll be doing just fine. Yeah, cool. So I'm going to be very randomly just sort of popping on colors at various parts of the miniature, and the reason for this is because I actually want to get a hang, or I want to get a feel for how the model color scheme will develop. So it helps to kind of flip from location to location. I find it especially useful with like contrast paints as well. That sometimes you want an area to kind of set up a little bit before you move on to an area adjacent to it. So don't mind me if I sort of flit around and it kind of looks a little bit chaotic as I go. But I promise you we are headed somewhere good together. So let's just stick with it and be patient. I'm also anticipating that I might need to do some hair dryer work as well, simply because this model has so many angles, and constantly handling it like this without a base might end up with me having very, very colorful hands. I hope that isn't the case, but you know what, it's already started to happen as I just checked, so not to worry, we will figure it out as it goes. So I hope you guys are having a good time. in general, I hope your projects have been going well and that you've been realizing good progress on your miniatures. And if not, it's okay. It's never too late to make a start. So one of the nice things about painting miniatures is that it's so incredibly low stakes, right? That it's just good for a good time. Anytime you need to kind of take the edge off a stressful week, or else if you want to do something that's clearly measurable and satisfying to do, just grab one miniature. Sometimes it's best not to set your goals too high with miniature painting because your models do really deserve the time that you spend on them, and it does you well to paint a model that is an overall like pleasurable experience rather than try to always focus on army building. Now, as I talk about army building like it's a bad thing, it is not. But yeah, sometimes the pressure and the stress can mount a little bit. How is my army building? Right, so those of you who've watched my previous videos will know that I'm actually gunning towards 1,000 points of Chaos Dwarfs for 5th edition. That happens this weekend, so I probably will take some pictures to share in the community section of my channel. So I hope you will look forward to seeing that. Probably not going to record the game because I find games like these a little bit chaotic with a lot of umming and ahhing. But yeah, I definitely will do my best to share pictures, hopefully of the completed Chaos Dwarf command, which at this stage is still not finished. This Chaos Dwarf Death Rocket will feature quite prominently in that list. It's a terrible idea. Chaos Death Rockets are... I mean, we talked about this before. I really think they symbolize death more to their crew than to the enemy sometimes. But that said, it might be fun to help get my opponent's Lizardman to disperse a little bit. Maybe make it a little bit harder for him to use his battle standard rerolls and so on. More than likely though, the Chaos Dwarf Death Rocket is probably just going to explode fairly early on. And you know what, that's fine with me as well. Just do what you're supposed to do. If you kill nothing, that's also good for me. The real joy was getting the army done anyway. And that's not just me hedging my bets early on. Although it might sound like it, I think it's also a case of realizing that once the battle proper starts, it's more of a simulation than anything else. You will more than likely make moves that are not ideal. You will more than likely make like critical mistakes that get told off in like all your post battle chats from now on, and that's entirely okay. It's just a simulation. And there's so much RNG in these games, honestly, that it's not really worth losing sleep over. More important is the fact that you enjoy the game, and then let it pump you up for the next game, where hopefully you might do a little bit better, or not, as the case may be. I think that's just fine. I think wargaming, because of the influence of the tournament scene, perhaps has gotten a little bit stressful. But I think with the right opponents, with the right mindset, and just the idea that you're playing out a simulation, you're not really trying to go for like tournament gold or anything like that necessarily, unless you are, in which case you know what you signed up for. But yeah, just the idea of thinking about this as something highly competitive and highly lots of skill expression and so on, especially for the early editions. I mean, the later editions I think are quite different. I think skill expression becomes a lot more significant. Luck, of course, is still a factor, but that's these games in a nutshell. And it's a larger philosophical point about whether dice games should be viewed with that kind of scrutiny rather than what it is, just a chance to hang out with friends that you like and just kind of an entertaining way to pass an evening. Which, to be fair, in the early White Dwarf issues, really was the vibe that a lot of the game designers were trying to get across. A game really was just an excuse to have a couple of drinks with a friend and laugh over some shared moments of what the hell did the dice do to me that day. And I think that kind of gets a little bit lost sometimes because, well, the inclination is to treat this like a competitive game because it's PvP, right? It's one on one, feels like a contest. It's set up in a very adversarial way. When really what you're really doing is exploring the old world together. Exploring battles in the old world together would be what I think I would describe playing this game as, like just learning about how these things interact, seeing like Night Goblin fanatics in action for the first time, for example, watching how a dragon fares against a hippogriff, for example, that kind of thing. I feel that might be a more apt title for the experience that Warhammer Fantasy of this edition anyway offers, and maybe that would set us not to be so highly competitive. But of course, it really depends on yourself and your opponent. Insofar as if you're a player who's going to have a good time no matter what, then I think bad luck doesn't bother you as much. But if you've got a certain expectation of how you want things to perform, like if you're absolutely invested in the idea that your Chaos Dwarf Death Rocket must blow up the enemy and not itself, you can sort of see how that sets you up for potential disappointment. But as with all things, your mileage will vary. Just get an opponent with similar, I guess, expectations, and then maybe that's okay. And I'm not talking about this. I mean, look, I'm not on a soapbox right now, right? Because I have personally, of course, had many moments, little rage moments, and I realized that that's really more to do with the mindset that I brought into the game rather than the game in and of itself, or heaven forbid my opponent, all of whom have been really nice people for the most part. I mean, let's face it, you wouldn't be playing games with them otherwise, because life is too short to play a game with somebody who is just going to, who's going to like rules lawyer every little moment. So you've probably already mentally vetted your opponent choice. Again, of course, none of this applies if you're talking about tournament games, but we're not talking about tournament games right now because the days of tournaments are very far behind me. And these days I'm mostly I play games so that I can see my painted models laid out. It's just an excuse to have a bit of an army on parade, so to speak. And let's put it this way, they kind of look the best at the start of the game, because as the game drags on and casualties get removed, the army starts to look a little bit ragged and a little bit worse for wear. And yeah, not something you should really be giving yourself too hard of a time about. It's just that the army looks best at the beginning. That's just how these games are set up. And as you take casualties, the army starts to look a little bit worn and ragtag. But I must say, the final few turns of a Warhammer game are the most fun. Not visually very compelling to look at, but it's when you've got your handful of like scraggly survivors facing off against the remnants of your opponent's army, and you're trying desperately to see the other off. It's almost as if the game is better with fewer playing pieces on the board, or maybe it's because we've got less things to think about at that point. I mean, you might start out with a level 4 wizard, and there's half a dozen like micro decisions to make at the beginning, but as soon as he explodes and his head detonates from casting a spell badly, suddenly all that really matters is what you are going to do with the remnants of of that surviving unit. So yeah, less stressful as the game goes on, and that's not a bad thing. That sort of last minute scramble for points, I find this when Warhammer gets really fun, when some units are just too battered to actually enter combat anymore, or else they're desperately running across to the other side of the table to try to aid that friendly unit that's still hanging on for dear life, as is being absolutely mulched by your opponent, the opponent's Chaos Lord on a dragon. That kind of situation, maybe you can take that last wound off that dragon, turn the tide of battle. Yeah, so those micro decisions I feel are when Warhammer as a game gets really exciting. And yeah, that at the start of the game where you get to see everything laid out for the first time, and it's like all that time spent has been worth it. Worth it. Which is why I try my very best to not play games unless my army is fully painted, because I mean within reason, right? Like I don't want the idea that you have to play games only when your models are all complete. Really, it really depends on you and your opponent, and of course an army has to start somewhere. It doesn't start fully painted. You cannot be expected to, I don't know, take years before you get your first game on the table. But I would argue that you would want to at least get everything assembled and undercoated, with a spray to unify all the different materials so they look a little bit better. Bonus points if you've picked an army where the undercoat can actually reflect the color of the final army. So for example, if you're playing Blood Angels and you get to spray them red, then that's even better. But not every army is like that, right? Like plenty of armies don't have that kind of good fortune. But yeah, these kinds of easy wins really go a long way towards making the army look a lot more presentable on the tabletop, and therefore sort of give you a little bit of that sort of new army high, which is, if you think about it, it's the main moment of excitement after actually purchasing the damn army in the first place. And it was always these moments of pageantry, of lining up everything on the table to look at it all together as a collection for the first time. These are the things that kind of keep me going, and these are the things that I most enjoy. Yeah, what followed is a series of disappointing game moments, but that's just how it works, because no plan survives contact with the enemy, and I wholeheartedly believe that. And it's really the little micro decisions and the little adaptations that we make as the plan utterly collapses that sort of determine the outcome of our games, assuming of course the opponents are well matched, and you're not really fighting a game that's an absolute uphill battle. But like I said, pick the right opponents, have somebody who matches your expectations for a game, and more than likely you'll be okay, probably. It helps a lot to know that your opponent is not deliberately making life for you as miserable as possible by picking the most effective list entirely out of their lists. Although sometimes with a bit of a mismatch of expectations, sometimes things can go a little awry, but these should be a minority of the time rather than the norm. If it is happening with upsetting regularity, then maybe it might be time to have that conversation with your opponent, or else just up your game and have, if you are so inclined, put together a list that can take on opponents like that. If this is just not your jam, then it might be time to have a bit of a conversation about what your expectations were out of a game, or else just view the whole thing as a simulation and go home happy after having get your butt handed to you on a plate. Nothing wrong with that. No shame in it. No one should sort of really see these games as any kind of real marker of skill. It's just an opportunity to, like I said, share, to just have a bit of a joint exploration of the Warhammer world and all of the myriad horrors that it presents. So, Rocket is moving along. One thing I do like about doing these videos, and I'm really happy for every one of you who decides to hang out with me to listen to me ramble on as I paint these, is frankly how quickly they come along, they move along as I paint this. I mean, I shouldn't say it quite that way. Maybe listening to me is just really long and slow and painful, but for me, I find that painting the miniature just flies by, and that's really, really cool. Yeah, sometimes I think I'm not sure what it is. I guess talking about painting while painting is a really good way to take your mind off, the minor irritations of painting models. Like if you make a little mistake, then it's just a mistake. It's fine. We'll recover. You know, we're not going to lose sleep over it. Yes, it's on camera. Yes, you see me mess up. But at this point, I'm like, okay, cool. If you like what you see, you'll continue watching regardless. If you don't, then well, maybe sometime in the future I'll be able to change your mind again. If not, it's also cool. This hobby is big enough for all of us, and yeah, that's great. That's I think that's a really good, important like lesson to bring into the hobby. Yeah, I'm convinced that part of the problem is like the reason why people have less than ideal um, hobby moments, so to speak, is just the general mismatch in expectations. I think things would get a lot better if we just came out and voiced our choices, voiced our preferences. I mean, um, you know, if you're really just keen on a chill sort of get models on the table kind of vibe, you'll probably be a lot happier with actually losing a game. Because look, I mean, even like the experts, like even like tournament players, don't win every single game, right? Because the point of going to a tournament is that you get the reality of it is that you're going to get matched up against people who are at least as good as you are, or at least as committed to the idea of playing games as you are. Um, and you know that's kind of part of the gig, really. If you expected easy opponents all the way, then why are you at a tournament? You might as well just go newbie crushing, just by playing new people all the time, rack up your wins, so to speak. And if that makes you happy, then well, I hope you find a new way to experience the hobby and to enjoy it. But yeah, that kind of high, I suppose, that kind of tracking of win loss rates doesn't last. Sooner or later, you will come up against people who play really well, and they probably will smash you, and you're probably gonna get upset at some point. So that's not what the hobby should be, a source of frustration to you. So maybe that kind of approach isn't likely to engage you long term. But yeah, to each his own, I guess. Long story short, tournament games not really for me, and I would be wary about letting them sort of dictate your mood. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of key. If you are in the same mental space as me, then you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, then you're probably not watching this video, because this is such a low stakes video. This is such a chill, relaxed painting session just to get stuff done. And as far as I'm concerned, if I can feel a fully painted army on the table, then I would consider that at least a partial win already. So in that sense, I'm starting ahead mentally, but your mileage will differ. Cool. So the list I'm using this weekend will be Chaos Dwarves, of course. So there will be a Death Rocket as my sole artillery choice. I'm planning to bring a Great Taurus, the general and the Great Taurus, because I have to include the general. And if I'm going to include the general, then it doesn't make sense for me to be walking around on foot. And as it turns out, the Chaos Dwarves have fairly affordable mid-sized monsters. So why not just bring them along, since they're such an iconic part of the army anyway. So I will bring along a Great Taurus with the general riding on it. Haven't decided on the magic items, but I've allocated at least about 40 to 50 points to sort of spend on those. I'm bringing a level 1 sorcerer because, and this is something that I didn't really remember from the earliest days of playing Warhammer, is that I didn't really remember that dispelling is kind of dependent on having a wizard around. You get a bonus to your dispel attempts just by having a wizard. You know, it doesn't matter if it's just a level 1 dude, you know, fresh out of wizard college, just essentially Harry Potter standing at the front of your army. He does actually make a difference to your chances of success. Obviously, he's also kind of needed to cast spells and to have something to do in the magic phase. So I kind of like the idea of that already. So yeah, so a level 1 wizard, probably with a dispel scroll because I am deadly sensitive about being blasted by magic. We'll see. Although to be honest, Chaos Dwarfs are fairly tough, so maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. I have a compulsory unit of 10 Chaos Dwarf warriors. I have to have them, so they might as well, just be 10 strong. I've not really bothered with command groups, simply because I think I just want warm bodies on the table to soak up damage and maybe do some critical hammer and anvil tactics. And then the last unit I've opted to include is a unit of 5 bull centaurs. Just because bull centaurs, you have to have them. They're so cool. You don't have to have them as far as list building is concerned, but you have to have them because they're such a cool, iconic unit. And yeah, I've chosen to bring along 5 of the little buggers because I believe even 5 of them, the minimum unit size, would still be able to make a sizable dent in almost any opponent. Simply because they come armed with great weapons, so that makes them a mighty strength of 6, which should be enough to hurt most things in the game. Yeah, so that should be good fun. So yes, general on Great Taurus, a level 1 sorcerer, a unit of Hobgoblin Archers, that's the one I didn't mention. So a unit of 10 Hobgoblin Archers, Chaos Dwarf Axeman unit of 10, 5 Bow Centaurs, and a Death Rocket. That's basically 1,000 points, with a little bit of leeway for magic items, but I don't foresee myself taking anything really gigantic or really, game ending or game winning, so to speak. So yeah, I think that's pretty much the list that I intend to use. Okay, so I am almost done with all the silver. There's just a little bit at the back of the rocket that I've been using as a hand rest. So I'm gonna pinch the nose cone and get that part covered. And then before I go ahead and wash this, I think I would take a little hair dryer break just to make sure everything is dry, and we can start to give this thing a bit of definition. The good news is, I think this is the most disappointing part of painting anything that's just covered in metal. Silver paint has a tendency to make everything that you apply it on look very blobby and featureless, and it's a bit of a slog to get through this stage. But once you start adding a bit of definition, I kind of feel like, the appearance of the war machine, of metal covered war machines like the Chaos Dwarf ones, they start to look a lot like dramatically better. So I'm looking forward to the next step. Yeah, so just a little bit more metal where it's needed. Some bits I think I'm going to need to come back and undercoat again in a lighter color. For example, there are arrows on the chassis that I want to pick out in red, more than likely these ones over here. You can see the little arrows. I'll worry about that in a bit, and there's a bit of touch up to go. But yeah, okay, cool. Gonna take a break to hair dryer it, and I'll see you in a bit. Ta-da! Hey guys, we're back. We are back after a little stint with a hair dryer, and we've got a few glaring areas to fix. So let's just very quickly jump right in with the Black Templar once more over the bits that could do with a little bit more tidying up. Not too bad on the whole though. I think this dried quite nicely, although a little bit more Black Templar would not go amiss. Over there. And yeah, some of the underside here needs a bit of touch up, nothing too serious. Yeah, greatly looking forward to the moment that I get to put this onto the base. I tell you, that's the best feeling. Absolutely amazing. That point where you get to cap off all the time spent by placing this firmly into its final resting place on the base. I've opted to put these onto the base directly, just to glue them on and to have them a permanent part of the miniature. Simply because I don't want my artillery crew, going on a walk. And frankly, I don't think it will really affect gameplay too much. If the machine gets destroyed or is otherwise rendered inoperable, I have a tendency to just remove War Machine crew anyway, because there's kind of no need to have these models like putzing around in the battlefield long after their usefulness is over. To be honest, these guys can't hold to a charge anyway. As in, I don't think they actually can. They have to flee as a choice, so I think. But otherwise, I mean, honestly, I don't really see what they could do. So kind of no point worrying about stuff like that. So yeah. A little bit of touch up here and there. And I think we are ready for our next step. I also think I missed a little bit of silver, so let me just make sure that I get everything. Just a second. Yes, I think I did miss a little bit. I want one of the wheels. That part's okay. That's not it. There we go. A little section over here. Oops. Oops. Disaster. Oh no. How will we live? A little bit of red to fix up that area over there. And yeah, I think we are moving along at a fair pace. Things are looking good. I'm going to go ahead and put a bit of ice yellow on the nose cone. This will be shortly followed by a dab of Yandan yellow to shade as per the rest of the model that I've done so far. And then we go on with a bit of ultramarines blue to sketch in the actual very unnervingly crayon-like tube of the rockets themselves. Excuse me. I really like this model. I know that's probably going to be obvious from the way I've been lovingly describing it so far, but there's something about this model that kind of fits the Chaos Dwarf ethos really strongly. I don't know whose absolute brilliant brainwave it was to do rockets as as a key part of the Chaos Dwarf arsenal, but something about rockets really conveys that part of the Chaos Dwarf mindset. It's got a real fire and forget kind of vibe to it, and there's a lack of care in using something that's so violently, unpredictably destructive. That's very, very Chaos Dwarf in mentality. And I think that's what you want, right? You want war machines that kind of extend the logic of your faction and kind of elucidate a little bit of their mindset and their approach to war. In that sense, I consider the Skaven Screaming Bell one of the best design war machines, simply because not because in terms of how effective it was, goodness knows it was a bit of a wreck, but it has high levels of expectation built into its success, and frankly, as a whole, it tended to usually be a disaster, which was frankly always very much in keeping with the expectation with Skaven anyway. Skaven always seem to have that slight tendency to be self-defeating, and the occasional incredible performance really made that war machine one to watch. I guess in a way you could sort of rate war machines, because war machines in Warhammer were such a, I mean, they were obviously a bit of a highlight, right, of the army, and the size and complexity of the miniatures and the cost, both in terms of points as well as, of course, monetary terms, made war machines always a bit of a highlight. and something that I really enjoyed. So the fact that they would reflect accurately elements of that race's approach to warfare and their general attitude is kind of cool. I really like that idea that you can convey so much about a species or a race by just their general attitude when it comes to building the war machines. And Chaos Dwarfs definitely have a thing of the cackling mad genius about them, where you've got a weapon with amazing potential, far and away, more advanced looking than most of their opponents' war machines. I mean, the Empire are still using basic breech loading cannon. Wait, are they breech loading? No, they're muzzle loaders. Yeah, muzzle loading cannons, whereas like the Chaos Dwarfs are using breech loaders. Wait, that's not true. The Earthshaker cannon is also using a muzzle loader design. But at least they're firing shells, right? Like canister shells. And the Death Rocket is clearly a more elaborate looking kind of rocket. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, well, at least they're firing shells. So to me, that always felt like a step or two up in terms of advancement. And the great thing about it is, well, they aren't exactly better, right? Because a great cannon does more damage than most things in the Chaos Dwarf arsenal. So just the idea that with great inventiveness comes usually slightly variable performance, because what you're really trying to address is the idea that, these are not tried and tested ideas for a reason, because somebody's actually inventing things, and you get very much the sensation that a few more generations of careful testing are going to be high on the list for most of these war machines. But you already see like shreds of brilliance with especially the Earthshaker cannon, and in how it can kind of turn the tide of battle by itself by immobilizing enemy units. And the Death Rocket, with its ability to sort of scream into battle excuse me, and leave a trail of destruction in its wake. In theory, at least. In practice, well, we'll find out together, won't we? I'll let you know how these guys go, if I actually manage to kill anything with these. If I don't, frankly, that's fine with me as well, because these guys are not known for their reliability. They're just quirky war machines built by Chaos Dwarf smiths, and just the fact that they exist fills me with joy, because they are really so unconventional and weird. Okay, so this is coming along really nicely. Very pleased with how this is looking so far. So I'm going to drop on that Yandan yellow as promised around the nose, and it's time to just jump right in and start dousing this with Nuln Oil. But before that, sorry guys, one more hairdryer break. Back in a bit. Alright, we're back. Now begins the great Nuln oiling. There is a lot of metal on this, so this might take a while, but it is what it is, and it will take as long as it needs to. This is not a complicated step, just as with all things war machine, a slightly tedious one, but it's worthwhile to get it done just right, so the machine gets to look its best. And so I think my problems when I was a little tiddler working on these models, I tried very hard to make this model look just like a well-painted model. So what does that mean? It meant that I basically tried to make every square inch of this model, or every square millimeter of this model, as well painted as I possibly could. In hindsight, war machines look about as good as I guess their general treatment is going to be, meaning that you're going to be able to you're going to have maybe one or two areas to focus on, but really the rest of the war machine just kind of done looks good if it's done to an average sort of standard. So over painting a war machine is not advisable in my opinion. We're going to have to level with the idea that large amounts of this model are just going to be just metal work, and it's going to be shaded and quite rudimentary in its appearance. You could take this model and kind of completely overdo the shading and highlighting and so on. But for the most part, I find that tends to make the mechanical form of the war machine kind of get a bit lost. Really, what we should be trying to do is to try to reinforce the mechanical shapes of the model rather than worry about rendering everything to the nth degree, adding way too many highlights and so on. The whole point of the exercise really should be to be trying to make the model as readable and as clear and as clean as possible, as opposed to making every single surface just gorgeously painted to the nth degree. And in that sense, getting it done to that level isn't the hardest thing in the world. It just takes more consistent effort, and it takes patience and not getting worn out by just the process. As unfortunately, I took way too long to do this when I was a kid, and it ended up kind of costing me the motivation to finish the army, and that's when I just decided to sell it off, which is a bit of a shame, something that I kind of I kind of regret to this day. But at the same time, it's given me the motivation to do these over again and to have these models from my childhood back in my collection again. I think I should just be happy with that privilege. Sometimes, yeah, I mean, to be fair, we are talking about events that happened like over 20 years ago. So I really ought not to be complaining so much. They gave me joy back in the day, and I'm having to have that second renaissance, so to speak. So that's perfectly good as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. But yeah, back to the point about painting war machines. Yeah, I think worrying too much about painting it to like some kind of perceived golden demon standard or something. I think I was carrying a lot of insecurity about having to carry the torch of being the only competitive painter in my group of friends. I think it led me to really spend way too much time worrying about everything being perfect, as opposed to just finished and ready to take to the table. I felt, in hindsight, I carried a lot of burden for wanting to just always prove that I was better than everybody else, which is weird, right? Because we're painting miniatures, nothing about this is high stakes, and yet there is always this idea that I need to make sure that everything I do is at the absolute optimum, and that frankly wasn't healthy for my army painting experience, because it really made it so that I needed very much to make everything perfect before proceeding, and that really hampered the collecting and painting process. And at the end of the day, I didn't feel like I wanted to keep the army because I couldn't make it perfect. So this perfectionist streak ended up getting in the way of my personal enjoyment of the army, which I realize is something that is a lot more universal than I would hope, because I think I do get into conversations with people who feel like their miniatures must be absolutely held up to a standard, and they do this unconsciously. It's not even a case of people being willfully adamant about this. I think it's just a case of there is something about the experience of painting models that makes you want to do your absolute best, which is great and all, but there are times when it just gets too much. and it just kind of comes across as way too much high stakes, too much stress for what should be a very simple and enjoyable hobby. I'm gonna put this down now because oof, these arrows are driving themselves into my fingers. Pain. Cool. Okay, so he's not blue tacked down or glued down or anything like that yet, but I think at least having this to hold on to will save my fingers a little bit. So yeah, no need to put yourself under too much pressure when painting models. They're just models. For gaming, not unless you're doing like a competition entry, but that's a different kettle of fish entirely. And frankly, that's just a different gig. It's not for me. It might still be for you. Just remember to, I guess, slow down and enjoy yourself. And I think this hobby gets a lot more pleasing when we let ourselves slow down and just enjoy it. Yeah, it's remarkable, the ability of the human mind to sort of overcomplicate nearly anything that we do. Even something as low stakes and as basic as painting models. There's no real reason for this to become a stressful endeavor, and yet we do it to ourselves, don't we? Kind of interesting how that works, but there you go. It's just how it is. Okay, I am actually rapidly approaching the point where I'm very tempted to glue this down so that I can start so that I can start painting this as a single miniature and stop worrying about things that I can't see. So I might actually do that, because at some point it's best to start considering the miniature as a single piece, simply because you can start to worry about, or what, not worry about, but to start thinking about where you place your highlights to the best effect. It's only when the miniature is kind of in its final resting position that you can really make the best decisions about where to place your highlights and the position of your lighting and so on, without it moving all over the place. So with that in mind, I might just do that, since anything that I was liable to have problems reaching now has probably been painted with at least 1 or 2 coats. Certainly the undercoat, whether it's silver or red, and at least a little bit of a wash, it should all be in place. So I think I will take the time to glue it down now, and also do a bit more hairdryer action. Okay, just a second, back in a bit. Okay, rocket launcher glued down. Let's move on to detailing up a bit more of the metal. So I've got a mix of Gore Grunter fur as well as my usual gold mixture, and I'm going to be putting this on the areas that I want to be bronze. So that includes the end cap for the rocket launch tube. Honestly, it feels so much better now that this is one piece. Painting should be able to proceed at a fair clip from this point on. The wheel that this Chaos Dwarf is operating with his hand, which now makes so much more sense. I will block in this bronzy color again. This is a mix of Gore Grunter fur and my gold mixture, which itself is Nazdreg yellow plus a little bit of Nazdreg yellow with a little bit of Seraphim Sepia. Yeah, definitely feels good to have the model all together in one piece now, and I can start focusing on the overall look of the miniature rather than overly fixating on individual pieces. A real highlight for me, to be sure. I have mentioned that I kind of want to do the rocket that the crewman is holding, not this one, sorry. I realized I kind of misled you by painting that. I want to do this in red. And leave a little ring of white around the base of it, just like the other rocket. Yep, much better. As well as the stabilizing fins. Although these are rather fat stabilizing fins, I gotta say. Kind of don't look like they would do the job, but that's fine. Anything the Chaos Dwarfs make tends to look a little like the Chaos Dwarfs themselves. Kind of stubby and chunky, which is all part of the charm. And that's kind of that subtle nod to the design language, right? Well, maybe not so subtle, but yeah. Just the idea that, you know, they definitely look all of one set, which is why Games Workshop models look as good as they do, especially during this period, which is my favorite time in Games Workshop. Yeah, everything created in this era all looks like they're part of the same range, because even if they are stylized, they're all stylized the same way. And yeah, very, very pleasing to look at en masse, which is why I enjoy that aforementioned point where we place all the models out for a photo shoot. Yeah, and this is starting to look real good. Real happy with the way this is turning out. There will be lots of little bits of touch up. It's just how painting these models sometimes goes, but that's just how it is. Right. Okay, cool. So now that we're done with the non-oil wash, I'm beginning to see where we can kind of perk up the color scheme a little bit with a little bit of highlighting. Assuming I can find my bottle of silver paint. It doesn't evade me completely. So a little bit of an edge on these panels, just to make it pop a little more. And of course, a little bit of cleanup work on the cleats. Just to reinforce the form. And I only really do this on the top part, because I think that's where it's at its most visible. And where, you know, there are more egregious spills and splashes, such as here. Not many areas, to be honest. And to be honest, all of it need not be uniformly bright. There we go. A little bit more on the chassis and on the rear of the carriage. As well as on the brass bits. And a little bit of brass to blend it together again. And I think the Death Rocket is coming together rather nicely, if I do say so myself. Just making sure that all the little details can be picked out visually. A little bit more on the exhausts. The barrel vents, I suppose. Tube vent. And as I mentioned earlier, the arrows should be red, at least in my estimation. I think in the original model these were painted bronze. I just kind of prefer the look of the red because, well, the arrows are just for decoration, I imagine. And even if they're not just for decoration, I guess if you're going to be pointing out something important, it's well worth doing it in red. Okie dokie. I think we are doing well. Now it's time, I think, to come in and give the red a bit of a highlight, just to make sure that the model pops where it needs to. And this involves brightening certain points of the spokes, like this. So these wheels, so one's kind of like bugbear for me with these Chaos Dwarf models is they didn't always ship with this set of wheels. I actually really like the look of these very clattery carriage-like wheels, especially for Chaos Dwarf war machines, right? Because world building wise, it really works with the idea that they are into industry and so on. Really reflects that higher technology level. So I've gone out of my way to try to secure these wheels to make sure that, you know, the Chaos Dwarf war machines look ever so slightly more high tech. Because the wheels, you know, as they're always going to be sort of sitting at 90 degrees to the viewer, sort of edge on, as you will, it always makes sense to kind of pick wheels that very much suit the theme of the miniature. So it always kind of bothered me when I was a lot younger that, you know, these miniatures sometimes would be shipped with wheels that didn't kind of reflect this mechanical nature. Sometimes they would be given the wooden wheels as the Earthshaker cannon was. Always thought that looked a bit odd, and I always would prefer these carriagey wheels. They tended to be shipped with the flat sort of wagon wheels. And I don't think wagon wheels kind of sell the idea of a mechanically advanced race. Not when they kind of look like agricultural wagons wheels. Kind of not ideal for the look. So I didn't quite enjoy that. And for the Earthshaker cannon, yes, because I have the Earthshaker cannon primed and ready to go as well. For the Earthshaker cannon, I've managed to secure a set of 4 of these carriage wheels as well. And that is filling me with a lot of joy. Just the idea that, you know, the version of the model that I'll be painting is the one that will be the apex version in my estimation. That's kind of been the driving force behind, you know, putting together these models and painting them up, is that I always want to be painting sort of the apex form of the miniature, at least in my view. And with that in mind, that's kind of why I use like shields, like the Fabozel shields for the Chaos Dwarfs, because I thought that they were far and away the best looking Chaos Dwarf shields, and very, very on theme for the Chaos Dwarf miniatures. So I ended up using that. For the Chaos Dwarfs themselves, the Hobgoblins get Marauder shields, because that best reflects their slightly lower tech. Marauder as in the outfit that Trish and Ellie Morrison, now Trish Carden, used to run. So back then they created this really nice set of shields with unique designs, but they tended to be a little bit softer in terms of detail because they were older, but they still look plenty good for what I wanted to achieve. So I've used those. I've gone ahead and used those for the Hobgoblins because it reflects their level of technology. And I really like that kind of world building aspect to the models that I put together. Just a few more highlights on the rocket proper, and together with the one in the crewman's hands, I think we are getting to a really good place. And this war machine is ready to explode uselessly on the battlefield. But there you go. There you go. The best laid plans of dwarf and men. often do go up in smoke. It's a little bit of a touch up around the miniature, and I think we might be ready to call it. Maybe just a bit more of this brass mix on this brace below. There we go. I'm kind of giving him a bit of a scan around, but I think he should be ready for this weekend's game. I think, barring one final highlight on the red, because like I mentioned earlier, sometimes painting miniatures is about finding something to be the hero element or even the hero color, and then kind of putting all the attention, all the viewers' attention onto that point, so that you do not then have to paint everything to the same 10 out of 10 level, not unless you want to, of course, but that's a choice you make, and the choice you have to live with as you paint your models. Because if you paint everything to a 10 out of 10, suddenly the whole army has to be, or it can feel that way, like the whole army has to be 10 out of 10, and that's just too much pressure for something that's supposed to be a pleasurable, chill pursuit, at least in my book. And yeah, maybe we don't need to have that kind of exacting stress levels in what is essentially a hobby and a leisure pursuit. For your downtime, goodness knows we probably have already too much stress in other areas of our life, and we don't really need that. Maybe. Okay, so that's it. I am happy to call that done for now. Thanks for watching. And as I say this, I quietly, sneakily reach for more ice yellow. This is becoming a bit of a theme with the way I paint. I apologize. But yeah, there we go. Sorry, not sorry. This guy is ready to go. I am quite happy with the way that looks. And thank you very much for joining me, for sitting and painting so patiently with me on this model, as it, we went through all the different stages of grief trying to get it to look right. Cheers. Have a good one. Pew pew! Let you know how it goes.